All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. This next conversation is with someone we were just talking before we started recording. This gentleman and myself, we've been in touch online for almost 20 years at this point.
Yeah.
It's been a long time, so I'm delighted to finally have some face-to-face time with this gentleman. It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Afzaal Deen. How's it going, my friend?
Good, Joel. Very nice to finally talk to you in real time.
Absolutely, absolutely. For the viewer who may be new to your work, you were the longtime guitarist for the band Crisis, who were originally based in New York City. Crisis existed from the early 90s until around the mid 2000s, and we'll definitely get into a lot of history with that band, who are one of my favorites of the era, I must say. And
Thanks.
you've done quite a bit since that time as well. So we have a lot of things to hit on in this conversation. But first and foremost, to kind of set the table for your history with things, when and how did music really first take hold of you and to where you ended up becoming a musician yourself?
Okay, Joel, I'm an old guy, so I don't want to be too verbose because it's a long history, but I think it all started in 72. I was 9. I'm an old dude. And I used to circle Archie's comic books had a usually a page of catalogs like K-Tel classics. I'm talking about like real old stuff. They had a catalog, and my sister and I would rip the catalog page out and circle it. And my dad was traveling the world at the time. He used to travel a lot. Talking about Pakistan, and he would bring back cassettes of the stuff that we circled. And so I would basically, that's how I got into Sabbath, Thin Lizzy, Deep Purple, James Brown, Jackson 5, The 3 Degrees, Anna Ross, a lot of stuff. But it was my, entry into sort of contemporary music, what was rock back then, or acid rock. Heavy metal didn't even exist really back then. So it was really cool. But that's how it started. And I'll give you a specific example that sort of changed my entire outlook on music. And it was a song by Deep Purple called Child in Time. And it was the live version. So I had asked him because the KTEL stuff, a lot of it was like greatest hits, and it was 24 karat purple, which was basically like the best of Deep Purple up to that point.
Right, right.
And and it had, it didn't have the original version of Child in Time. They had a live version of Child in Time, and that it was a longer version, and it was extremely, extremely powerful and impactful on me. Ian Gillan's voice just like used to give me goosebumps. I used to listen to it on the headphones at night, and it sort of changed my outlook on music. I'd never heard dark, atmospheric dark music in that way. And the lyrics, were just phenomenal. The music was phenomenal and everything. And then Sabbath, of course, in addition to that, and Thin Lizzy, just sort of, that's when the dream was born in my head about me wanting to do this uh, for a living. But it was a secret because my family would never allow that. So I came from sort of a very bougie background, very bourgeois upbringing, and like I was wanting to be an architect because my uncle was an architect, and so I wanted to pursue architecture, and that was okay with them. That was very palatable for them, and they were like, "Oh, it's a noble profession, blah blah blah." But and that was also going to be my escape route out of, you know, the Middle East into the Western world, and then eventually to the U.S. Because my family moved from Pakistan when I was 11 to Dubai. From Dubai, I went to England to finish high school, and then from England, I came to the U.S. in '82. So, but through the way I was in bands in Dubai, And then in England, I saw some I mean, I saw Motorhead in '81. I saw Iron Maiden in '79 with Paul Diano. I mean, they were formative, moments in my life that led me to later on. And I didn't really get into music until after I graduated from college as an architect, and I started working as an architect in Manhattan. And that was like I was basically moonlighting as a musician, while working a full-time job.
So you hit New York City in 82, correct?
No, I hit Chicago in '82. I was in Chicago for 5 years
Oh,
getting a degree in architecture, a professional degree in architecture. I was in a 5-year program. So
mhm.
I was in Chicago in '82, and that's where the whole my Chicago roots are very, very strong and still very live. I know you're friends with I know my dear buddy Laura Gomel. I think you know Laura too, right?
Oh,
You know
sure.
Laura.
Yeah, I played with Laura and Pigface.
I've known Laura since she was 18.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I love her.
Yeah, yeah. Laura and I go back a long ways. In addition to Al and Paul and all the guys from ministry, I've known those guys since '82. So
Wow.
yeah,
Wow. Yeah, I have a great affinity for Chicago.
yeah. I
Um,
know you do. I know you do.
yeah. I wasn't around in 82. I kind of started my initial friendships with folks out there in the early 90s.
Yeah, I
Uh,
know you're a little younger than me. So
but I know, 82 Chicago, we're talking, the
oh my
early days
God.
of Wax Tracks and
Yeah,
Al,
yeah,
all that sort of blossoming.
yeah. That's a whole different life. I mean, my friendships that I formed in Chicago in '82 are still current. Like my friend Sorolta, she played the Fairlight CMI on Twitch live with Paul and Al, and I have some photos from those days. I think it was '86 when Twitch was that's when he was starting to get heavy with Adrian Sherwood
Yeah,
producing
yeah.
and stuff. And I took some photos of some of the shows that I was at with them. And my dear buddy Sean Joyce was like their stage manager. Sean is a very, very old dear friend of mine as well. So, in fact, Sean is one of the reasons I met Karyn Crisis, because Karyn Crisis used to work at Wax Tracks. I don't think anybody knows that. We've
I,
never
I,
really
I
advertised it. Yeah, Karyn's from Chicago, and Karyn used to work at Wax Tracks upstairs in the boutique. And when she moved to New York, I mean, real ironic story, but I mean, maybe I'm going too far forward in the way you want to take the interview, but I met Karyn through Sean and my buddy Sinbad, another guy. He used to be a security guy at the Metro and at a few other bars in Chicago. But that's how I met Karyn. I was already in New York several years before her, and then when she moved to New York, she was told to look me up by Sean,
hmm.
from the Wax Tracks. So that's how
it,
we met.
it's amazing how small the world really is.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So when did you eventually make your way out to New York?
So I moved to New York 10 days after graduating from college. I had the sort of wherewithal to go to New York City and do get some interviews lined up for my architecture work before I graduated. And I had three job offers. One was from Richard Meyer Architects, one was from um, Cohen Pedersen Fox, and one was from Edward Larrabee Barnes, the three architectural firms that I had interviewed with. And so 10 days after I graduated from university, I basically flew to New York City, stayed with a buddy of mine, and started my job. And then I finally found a place in downtown in the financial district. I found a loft space, which was not even, it wasn't a residential loft space. It was a commercial loft, but we were all living illegally back then anyway. It was the '80s, so that's when I started working as an architect, and then I actually got two of my friends from Chicago. They moved to New York as well, and we started. I was in an industrial band in Chicago before Crisis called Stalwart. And we even toured, you know, and we had a record out on Semaphore Records, which was a label out of Holland and Germany called Semaphore back in the late 80s. And we sort of broke up on the eve of our European tour, but we put a I was in a noise industrial band. It was like a mixture of like New York noise, Swans meets Godflesh, that kind of stuff, you know. We started in 87 through 1990. So like 3, 4 years, yeah.
Along the way, as you're getting more active in performing music yourself, um, and I preface this question by saying, you know, one thing I really loved about Crisis is your guitar sound, because there weren't many guitar players doing what you were doing in those days. Um, Particularly, the second album stands out to me for that in a lot of ways. Um, as you're developing your sound, who were you listening to? What was sort of driving that direction that you eventually took with Crisis on the guitar?
So it's a, you know, it's a loaded question, but I'll tell you, my, of course, my main lifelong influence is Tony Iommi, but that's because I'm also a lefty guitar player. I've always played guitar left-handed, and you sort of have, it's like a most lefty guitar players are quirkier than righty guitar players. It's just, I don't know, it's the right side of the brain. Everything comes out a little different than normal. So, but having said that, that was the 70s. I think that post-punk played like a very big role in my guitar playing style, because I was, you know, after having seen Motorhead and Iron Maiden and Killing Joke in England, when I moved to the US, metal had sort of become like it was like arena rock in the US, as opposed to in England it was very underground, you know. So I got way more into, I went to Chicago, of course, you know, hotbed of underground music. And I got way into post-punk. I mean, bands like The Sisters, Gang of Four, um, you know, Joy Division. I mean, I'm still wearing my Joy Division shirt, but this is like my probably 50th Joy Division shirt. But you know, Joy Division I started listening to when I was in boarding school, and I remember the day Ian Curtis died, and 2 months later, a buddy of mine, Greg, killed himself. He's the guy who turned me on to Joy Division, and I was like dumbfounded when he took his own life. But he had glandular fever. He had health problems, and so he took his own life. But Joy Division had a very big impact on me, even though I can honestly say that initially it sort of went over my head, because it was it was out of my vocabulary at the time when I first heard Joy Division. You know, even Killing Joke had more like aggressive rhythm, whereas Joy Division had a lot more minimalist
Mm.
darkness. You know, it was just really interesting stuff. But I got into it after Ian Curtis passed away. I sort of became obsessive about the music. But my guitar playing, getting back to the guitar playing part of it, is that because I was left-handed and I was self-taught, and I had spent about 8 years trying to learn right-handed guitar, and I just couldn't pick it up. And everybody was like, you know, give it up. You're not a guitar player. And then a buddy of mine who was a guitar player, uh, he said, "Look, man, here's a guitar. Take it, flip the strings, and see if you feel more comfortable." And if he hadn't given me that guitar, he gave me an electric guitar. I took it home. I switched the strings, and I shit you not, in about an 1 hour, I knew how to play the guitar. One
Mm.
hour. Because I was such a frustrated guitar player that once I realized that that is what it was completely natural for me to strum with my left hand and sort of play notes with my right hand, it was so automatic that the rhythmic hand was so fluid by then that just I was sort of pent up. So that's how I knew I was a left-handed guitar player, by me switching the strings around. Nobody ever bothered to tell me to switch the strings around. It was so weird. So, but going forward from that, the post-punk sound was more slash and burn and much more geometric and angular. And me being an architect, I always looked at rhythm, and it was mathematical always. Industrial music was very, very down my alley. It turns out I didn't realize it until I started playing guitar, and then once I bought a drum machine, what I did is I bought a drum machine soon after I started playing guitar. And what happened was everything sort of fell in line, and I was able to start writing music right. That's the thing. Like, it was more about songwriting, and not even songwriting, about structure.
Mm.
Because just like architecture is about foundation, structure, the skeleton, and then you sort of dress it up. Whether it's concrete or brick or wood or glass. Um, that's what architecture is. It's like the inherent structure and then the icing on the cake, which is all the details. And I went to the School of Architecture in Chicago, which was started by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who's a master of modern architecture, which he's the one who started the steel and glass skyscraper. He
Mm.
was like a very, very futuristic architect for its time. So music and architecture, goes hand in hand with me, and it always has. So I mean, that's really the easiest way for me to put it. Architecture and playing guitar it's very, very geometric in my opinion. Even I went back and analyzed Iommi's guitar work, his rhythm, his riff work, and it's very geometric and very angular and very sort of, monumental. It's like Swans. That's why Swans are one of my favorite bands of all time, because somebody told, I think it was Sounds in England, they wrote an article saying that, Swans, if you want to hear an allegory to Swans, it's like somebody throwing cinder blocks through plate glass windows.
Mm.
That's what the Swan sound is. And when I heard that, I'm like, holy shit, that's exactly what it is. So it was that dirgy, sludgy, slow throwing of cinder blocks through plate windows. That
Yeah.
was the sound. And Neubauten, Einzelzen and Neubauten, for example, is the two bands that Karyn and I met on, and what really ignited Crisis musically and lyrically was two bands, Neubauten and Copter Twins. So it was the extremities of uh, harsh brutality and pure melody, and euphoric, like uh, ethereal, melancholic music
Mm.
and brutal music.
That makes sense. And I'll jump forward a little bit because that comparison you just gave, Neubauten and Cocteau Twins, the light bulb went off in my head because to me, in my never humble opinion, the quintessential Crisis song, in my opinion, is Gemini off the first album. And that's exactly what that song sounds like.
Yeah.
How do you said it? I'm like, yes, 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 yes.
Yeah. And that song was written in about 15 minutes. We literally, it's like the song just came. It's weird. That's one of the few songs where I started with the harmonics and I went into this riff, and then Karen started experimenting with her ethereal voice. And we did this build to it, and then there was like this. It took on a sort of a Killing Joke type of endless rhythm thing that Killing Joke has always had. just like all the industrial music, including Kraftwerk, they always talk about endless rhythm and the hypnosis of it, and that's really what that was about. And I think Gemini sort of wrote itself. It was weird.
Yeah, when I was first introduced to Crisis, in a lot of ways, in one band, you were kind of my record collection at the time because I heard Swans, I heard Cocteau Twins, I heard Neubauten. Um, I heard some Jarbo in there. I heard, there was there's a lot of things that was other things that were really impacting me at the time were
Yeah.
sort of condensed into the Crisis sound. Not to suggest in any way that you were derivative, you weren't, but I could hear like the similar gears were spinning with you guys with what was on my record player already when I first heard you.
And Joel, I think the ironic part about it is that Karyn was not a metalhead. I was not a metalhead at the time when Crisis started because I was in an industrial band, but I had gotten sick and tired of electronic failure on stage, monitors, all the shit that goes along with playing live, industrial music live. And so I wanted to come up with I wanted to form a rock band. By the way, Fred Waring, who was the original drummer for Crisis, is also the is also was in Stalwart. He was in the industrial band.
Mm.
I'm I mean, it's been 35 years. Him and I have been jamming together, and we're still jamming together today. So, but I think that what I was going to say is that even though we weren't metalheads, I think that there was an honesty in the way we jammed and the extreme emotions that I had in me and Karyn had in her and Fred and Gia had in us that came out and that formed the basis of what became a heavy metal band. But that's really not, we didn't look at it, we didn't, back then in New York, we didn't look at things so genre specific. I mean, it really wasn't about the genre, it was about incorporating our emotions and our pretty brutal environment in New York. In Lower East Side was, you know, pretty rough. It was raunchy. It was you know what I'm talking about. It was like 80s and 90s was rough there. You had to watch your back wherever you went. You had to be on you know the alert button was on. You had to have eyes on the back of your head wherever you went. Especially if you looked like a freak like we did. We were like, and even though we incorporated elements of hardcore and metal and industrial music and experimental music, like we were frowned upon wherever we went. I mean, in New York, like if you look like a freak in the Lower East Side, they all thought you were a junkie. Because that was the days of junk. I mean, that was dope was everywhere. So everybody thought we were a bunch of junkies playing weird music. Didn't really understand that our intention was so specific and our music wasn't random. Like a lot of people slag Crisis initially because they thought, oh, there's a metal band with this weird performance artist on stage just freaking out, and it's like a freak out band. But that's how it came off. But when they realized that the songs actually were the same every time we played, it was just a sort of an exorcism of sorts. But the music was the same. The they were actual songs. It wasn't pure experimentation and random acts of sonic violence or whatever. It was actually thought out. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that was always my takeaway when I was listening in the 90s as you were putting out records. Um, it wasn't just noise. Karen wasn't just shrieking the entire time. It's interesting you bring the mathematical side to it because I'm always thinking like this. I bet these guys and gal, there's some King Crimson records in there somewhere. Like, this is thinking man's music. It sounds metallic. And I know you were signed to Metal Blade at one point in the 90s. But I often thought like, gee, maybe maybe Crisis is in the wrong genre in a way. And I don't know if you see where I'm going with that, but
yeah, I think that's very, very true. I mean, I think we were sort of the ugly ducklings of you know, the Lower East Side, but I think it was also that back then things were very tough. I mean, musically, because it was, I think Nirvana was king, grunge was like it, and we were doing something a lot more extreme, and I think that it had to play itself out. I mean, we had to work and work and work and play shows and tour, and even then it didn't get easier. I think the bands that started with us, if they're still around today, they're doing very well. Unfortunately, we weren't able to keep it going past, I would say, 15, 16 years, I think. But bands like I Hate God and Crowbar and all those guys that are still around, look at them. They're now people have the respect. And by the way, I God was slagged off as like a joke band for a long time, you know. So they're friends of mine, but I know that they also were slagged in a big way because nobody took them seriously. They were like, "What the hell is this?" It's like really slow punk rock sounding, punk rock sounding vocals or hardcore vocals over very very slow doomy music, and people didn't consider those riffs to be really palatable riffs. Now they're like legendary, but it's years of playing that. I mean, bands that have affected the musical tastes of a couple of generations of bands after that. Now it's like, oh yeah, now you get what those bands were about, so I think longevity plays a lot into it. I mean, unfortunately, we don't couldn't keep it together that long, um, but I think that sometimes bands are way ahead of the curve. I mean, Voivod is a really good example of a band. They're still going. That's why I have so much respect for them. I have so much respect for Michelle. I mean, that guy,
Yeah.
he is a. I mean, I can't say enough good things about Michelle. That guy is unbelievable. You know, I love that man. Really, I have nothing but respect. He's a true epitome of an artist. Really. You know?
Yeah. And also with the Voivod guys, incredibly nice people too. I
Oh
mean,
my God. We did 2 tours with them, and they were the Eric Forrest years. But I mean, the amount that we learned from those guys and the amount of respect and brotherhood and sisterhood and like just the tribal connection that we developed with Voivod, it's still there today. I just saw Voivod do their 40th anniversary show they did in St. Pete. I think it was, I don't even remember. It was less than 6 months ago, I think.
hmm,
Um, and it was great to hang out with them, and band sounded great. I mean, even though Biggie's gone, but that guy Dan Mongrain, the
yeah,
phenomenal guitar. Holy, I mean, that guy is he is like Piggy. He even looks like Piggy, but he's Piggy and even more. I mean, the guy is phenomenal. I never thought anybody could fit Piggy's shoes, and they can't. Right? I mean, there's nobody like Piggy. I was so close to Piggy, I became Piggy's guitar tech as an opening band because Piggy, it was they didn't have a budget for touring, they had no tour support, and Piggy, poor guy, he was lost when setting up his gear, breaking it down. So I was like, Piggy, I'm gonna do it. So I basically became his guitar tech for the whole tour just to help him out, and I learned so much from that. And he ended up dying on my birthday, which really killed me. But yeah, I love Piggy. Consummate artist. Piggy and Michelle were like this, man.
yeah, yeah. I've interviewed Michelle a couple of times. He's always super cool. I've
Oh, dude.
interviewed Snake as well, and I've talked to Dan online. Just a super cool bunch of people, you know.
Way cool. And artists, man. Like deep, deep artists, Really, really amazing people. Yeah, I've met some great people to playing music, but yeah, they're definitely up there. I don't know how we got into Voivod, but like, oh, I was saying that some bands unfortunately are ahead of the curve, and timing plays a big part in music, I think,
Well,
and, and longevity.
the timing of Crisis was interesting because this is early 90s, and um I don't think I'm going too far out on a limb to suggest it was pretty groundbreaking at the time to have a front person like Karyn. Um,
Absolutely.
who, I mean, the rest of the members of the band, you're bigger guys, you're tattooed and big, and you've got like, like a, for want of a better description, to make it kind of cheap and easy, kind of a metal vibe visually. And then you
Mhm.
have a small lady kind of fronting the band with that voice and that versatility. She's wearing wings and the whole thing. Um, and I don't want either of us to speak for Karyn, of course, but
No, no.
I the immediate thought would be I would have to imagine she took some guff, especially in the early days, and I know that's addressed even on the first album with the song "Sweet Thing."
Yeah. Oh,
Where
yeah.
he hits it out of the park, like this is the score. Um, I what level of difficulty, if any, did the band have just by the simple fact of who you had fronting it in those days?
It was a double-edged sword, to be honest. I mean, I think that on one hand, we got attention, which was like almost like shock value. Oh, there's this crazy female singer, she's attractive, but she's nuts, all these comments that we kept hearing. But I think that when it came to the musical press and the music industry, the scenesters and the power players, they did not take us seriously because they just couldn't compare us to anything that they thought was palatable or successful or something that they could make money off of, which is, I mean, but let's be frank, Joel. I mean, I'm I'm a I'm a punk rocker. I've been a punk all my life. I like music and I'm a music nerd from the 70s. But when it comes to my attitude about music, I'm a total punk. Same with Karen, same with Gia, same with Fred. We were not going to listen to anybody and not be told what to do. And I won't name names and record labels, but when we wrote Gemini, there were a few labels that came to us and said, "Listen, man, you've got something, and if you really focus on what you did with Gemini, I think you guys can make it huge, and you guys will have whatever deal you want." But the issue there is, it's like you have to sit there and realize, like, we were full of piss and vinegar at that particular stage, and we are not going to sit and write 10 Geminis. You know what I mean? It's not going to happen because as artists, I mean, me being an architect, but also being an artist, and Karen being a painter and visual artist and all that, every piece of music needs to stand on its own and and be valid in on itself. It's not just about sticking a bunch of songs together that sound right and go together. There was no premeditated, contrived approach. We used to write everything together as a band. We were a real band, which most people didn't realize. Yes, I might have generated certain ideas and create the inertia, and Karen created the inertia from her point of view. And some songs were written starting from a bass line, and sometimes a song was written with a tribal drum pad, and we wrote a song based on that. So we did all the approaches, but I think that was our experimental approach, and we didn't want to lose that. So that's when we basically threw that whole idea out. That's why we never wrote another Gemini. You know? It was almost like a reaction to it when people were like, you know what, that's what's going to make you successful. We were like, okay, that'll make us successful, but that's not who we are.
Yeah.
We have a lot more exploration to do sonically and lyrically, and we're not going to just limit ourselves stylistically in any way, you know. So we had to be honest. That's probably why we never became rich and famous, but it's because we never ever gave it
Mm.
that validity that, oh, you know what, we've got the formula. Finally, we wrote a song, we've got the formula. Let's nail it, you know, let's nail that and go with it, like run with it. It's like the only band I can compare us to attitude wise, not that we're not even a shadow of what they are, but the Melvins. Melvins are a band that you cannot pigeonhole
Right.
ever, you know, and they're still going strong. And I have nothing but respect for them because in the end, they don't kowtow to anybody, you know. I mean, they are their own masters. And any artist will tell you, if they're a true artist, that they're not going to be told what to create. I mean, if an artist is told what to create, then they're not an artist anymore. You know, and if they do, and if they go along and create what they're told to create, that's not art. You know.
I'll tell you one thing, and we'll get into Prices Live in a bit deeper. But when I started seeing the band in the later part of the '90s, probably around '97, I was in college at the time, you know, and my peer group were a bunch of college age young men, and I use the word men lightly because we were goofballs and we were, you know, that age. We hadn't grown up to become proper gentlemen yet. You know, so we'd go out to see Crisis. Um, and you know, looking at someone like Karyn, you know, singing in a band, you would think myself and my peer group would be like, oh, look at her, you know. But the reality is, I don't remember ever hearing anything like that at a Crisis show from any of the young men in the audience. If anything, I know within my peer group, it was okay, we're watching a next level performer who's head and shoulders above anything else we're seeing right now.
Mm.
It transcended the entire gender issue
Gender.
entirely watching.
You know what, man? Thank you for saying that because that is that is the truth, and that is really what it was. Because, and you know, there's something that it's not about taking credit or giving credit or anything like that, but Fred and I were in an industrial band, like I said, called Stalwart, and when it broke up, both him and I, at the same time, we came to the conclusion that we want to start a really heavy band with a female singer. And we had not met Karen then yet, and we never thought that I mean, Karen is like a dream, really. I mean, after having thought of starting a heavy female fronted band, to meet Karen was it was kismet because you can't really go out looking for a person like that. You know what I mean? It doesn't
Right.
really happen. It just sort of falls into our world. But Fred and I believed in female empowerment back then because that's what we wanted to do. And that is what happened. And that is what we did. Whether we got the credit for it or the importance for it or whatever, it's not really important. The point is that it was a living, breathing mechanism for 15 years. And we were fully committed to that, you know, gender defying music because I think that it was taking on a lot of machismo head on at a time when nobody wanted to hear about it. They're like, you know, they were actually some reviews. I would love to dig them out now. I don't even know. There were some no name guys, but they were saying that this woman has no business singing like a dude. Only death metal dudes can do that. That's why I fucking hate death metal as a result, because I heard those reviews. Not that there isn't great death metal, don't get me wrong, but as a genre for what it stands for and the boneheads that support that genre, I was like, you know what? Fuck all of you guys.
Mhm.
I mean, even though the guys in Deicide and the guys in Cannibal Corpse, we got along well. They loved Crisis. I had no problems with the musicians, but it was the connotation and the innuendo about like this male dominated, the heaviest form of heavy metal, the most gruff, bass form of, male voice. It just turned me off. I'm like, you know what? And all the comparisons of Crisis wanting to be a death metal band, but failing miserably, it's all bullshit because we never were trying to do that anyway. They didn't. They those idiots have never heard bands like Amoebics and fucking Discharge, and they don't have a fucking clue.
Right.
We came from a completely different background anyway. We never came from that. So that's where it was all lost. It was all confused. Because we signed them, and unfortunately we got signed to Metal Blade, so that automatically brought that genre specificity and then threw us to the wayside because it's like, oh, this is just one of those C-rated, D-rated bands. And I think that maybe it was a mistake that we signed to Metal Blade, but at that time it gave us a lot of attention as well. That was positive. So at least we got on the map. But there was, like I said, it's a double-edged sword, Joe. I mean, there was good things that happened as a result of Karyn being Karyn, and there were bad things that happened. I think the bad things were that people wanted to objectify her as a sexual female, attractive, sultry, but she wasn't any of those things. She was what I consider an enigma and more animalistic in as an artist. She was already displaying those very visceral attitudes that people like Henry Rollins express. You know what I mean? She was more like a Henry Rollins than a death metal singer. You know what I'm saying? Because she was very in touch with her femininity. You know.
And that left an impact because let's go down memory lane. I used to see you guys play at the Cove in Roselle, New Jersey.
Great room, man.
Yep.
What was her name? Was it Jackie? What
Jane,
no,
Jane
huh?
Jubilee. Jane Jubilee.
Jane Jubilee. I'm sorry, I'm so bad with names. Jane, she was a sweetheart. She was awesome.
Yeah.
Loved that place. It was
But
a juice bar.
yeah, well, that was my point because it was an all ages place. Uh,
Yes.
you know, the bands I had coming up at that time, we played there. Uh,
Mm,
and that's where kids congregated, and
absolutely.
thank you, Jane Jubilee, for facilitating a place like that at that time. And
Yes.
you guys played there quite a bit, if I
We
recall
did.
correctly. I
Did.
saw you a bunch of times there, and that's when I
We
was,
did.
I was a touch older than some of the audience members. I was kind of in college at that point, but the fact that there was no other, and you guys went over really well there, and I think that was because you were so different, because there were a lot of young ladies at the shows.
Yes. Yes.
And to see a band like Crisis, to see Karyn up there specifically, to see the musicianship in the band, I think it was pointing younger people in that audience in a new direction. It was kind of showing them, you don't necessarily have to follow the straight path. You can go this way, and I can't overstate, how impactful those shows were. I'm sure for a lot of younger people in those crowds, because it was like you guys came from Mars. You got to remember, this is New Jersey, you know,
Yeah.
and there wasn't anything like that.
I
It,
I do. There was a magic about the Cove. There was a magical vibe in that room every time we played there, and that's
yeah,
why we kept playing there. Because anytime anybody said, "Oh, you want to play the Cove?" we were like, "Yeah, let's do it." Because it was one of those things that when musicians feel at home,
yeah,
uh, at a venue, then they keep coming back, you know.
And another thing I loved about Crisis in that era when I got into you was um, your music, and I say this with the greatest respect, was a line in the sand for a lot of people. Either you got it or you didn't in a lot of respects. I remember
Very true.
I was at one time, I was the editor of my college newspaper, and I had been sick for a few days, so I was out, and the other people on staff had to finish that particular issue. So the music reviews had to get done. They couldn't wait on me to come back. So we had another music editor who was a nice guy, but like Pearl Jam was as heavy as he ever got, one of those cats. So I'm reading the paper's done. I said, do it. Don't wait on me, get it out. So I'm reading it like everyone else when it's published. And I'm reading this review, and this poor guy's like, I don't get this record. I don't understand. This is like listening to, it's not even music to me. The singer's shrieking the entire time. I don't understand who would get into this stuff. And I'm reading it, and I said to him, I said, hey, do you still have that promo copy of that record here? Give it to me. Um, and it was Death's Head Extermination.
Yeah,
And so everything that he didn't like about it was like the selling point for me.
yeah.
I was like, yeah, I need this record. So that's how I kind of discovered you guys and followed you
That's
through.
that's
Um, I wanted to fast forward a little bit to the Hollowing album because what's interesting about that is the band utilized multiple drummers on that recording. Some great ones too. I think Jason Bittner's on that record. Roy, we got
Roy's on it.
we got to talk about Roy. The great.
Absolutely, my brother. So
Um,
is this.
so what led to having sort of a guest drummer environment for that album?
So what happened was that at that point, we had gotten off of 3 tours. We did a tour with Voivod, then we did a tour with Propane, and then we introduced the two bands, and then we did a tour with Propane and Voivod and us. And we had done a 2.5 month jaunt with with Voivod and Propane, and it was through the winter time. It was a grueling tour, and Fred, our original drummer who wrote, you know, with us for the Hollowing and Death at Examination, he after Jet Set came out, he did one short tour with us, and then his daughter was born, and he sort of bailed on us at you know, and because of that, we didn't have a permanent drummer. We had a couple of different drummers. Scott Bates was one of them. He was in a band called Gorgon, and then he was in Disassociate after that as well. But Scott did one of our long tours, and Fred was not able to commit full time as a drummer because we had a lot of touring to do. So I came up with the idea because I came up with the idea of sort of using the industrial methodology, which was let's use the human drum machine approach. I was like, look, we are lucky enough to be friends with some of the greatest drummers in the underground at the time. And I basically said, they might all be really busy to devote their full-time efforts to Crisis and to go on tour with us and all that. But I certainly can ask them for 2 or 3 songs each, and I can, write with them. And just like we wrote with Fred, so because we were a jam band and we jammed out every song and all the structures, and with Karyn writing lyrics and then coming in and sort of fleshing things out, everything was done organically. We were an organic band that way. But we employed industrial ideologies all the time. So what I had with Stalwart, we had always written with different drum machines, and I was like, look, I've got this amazing talent at my fingertips. Roy was sharing the rehearsal space with us at the time. Jason was in Stigmata, which is a band that used to play with us in Albany all the time and in New York. and Jason was a phenomenal drummer and undiscovered at that time. So I asked Jason to come down from Albany to jam with us. We wrote 3 songs with him. I asked Roy to jam with us. We wrote 3 songs with him. Fred was there, and Fred wanted to be a part of it, but he couldn't commit full time to it. So we wrote 3 songs with him, and then we wrote 2 songs with Chris Hamilton, who was in a band called Deadbolt from Pennsylvania. He later on ended up joining Downset, and he was in that band Blood Simple after that. Chris Hamilton's an amazing drummer too, and we met him through Kirk from Crowbar because we did a bunch of shows with Crowbar, and Deadbolt was opening up those shows. That's how we met Chris, and Chris became a huge Crisis fan, and he was chomping at the bit. He's like, "Dude, let me try out, let me try out." And we're like, "Look, come in and write a couple of songs." So that's how the 4 drummers took shape. And then of course we had Norman from Swans. You know, he played on a couple of our records, and on the Hollowing we invited him back. And then Sammy from Acid Bath and now Godor. Sammy also ended up singing a duet with Karyn on that record. So it was like sort of, again, you know, we always wanted to experiment with like-minded musicians, and Norman has always been sort of like my hero, anti-guitar hero. And Norman is like my older brother. I mean, him and I, like, I think that, you know, if there's anybody as a legendary musician who I still think is understated and underappreciated, is Norman. He's one of them, and he's really my true bro. I mean, I even took him to Pakistan, and you know, he stayed with me and my family, and I took him up to the Himalayas and stuff. I mean, because he was such a Bollywood fanatic, I was like, all right, come on, let's take you to Pakistan, and let's you can sort of get into the culture and really see what the hell it's all about. So he went with me. But yeah, I'm still in touch with him. He's a, you know, he's wonderful, amazing human being. You know?
Yeah.
He's like Michelle. Michelle and him are very similar. Understated, quiet people, but prolific. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Let
Yeah.
me throw another name at you, who in many ways is sort of underrated for his contributions. Steve McAllister.
Oh my God. Stevie, my Stevie is one of my mentors. So Norman and Stevie are both my mentors. You know, Stevie was my roommate. Stevie was my roommate for I think 3 or 4 years. Karyn, Stevie, and I lived together in our loft. In our loft was on the corner of Wall Street and Water, right around the stock exchange
Mhm.
in the financial district. And our neighbor, one of our neighbors was Phil Stanton from the Booman Group. We got in his loft um, in that building that we were in. Stevie McAllister, what can I say? I mean, I can say so much about that guy. That guy literally, he was a he was a fifth member of Stalwart, and he was a fifth member of Crisis. He was that integral to us, and he was just as integral to Prong and COC. And I mean, Stevie is like just the most incredible human being I can ever, you know, that I'd ever come across. I mean, one of the first people I met in New York when we moved from Chicago, and every time I'd go to a record store and buy a record, I'd look and it'd say engineered by Steve McAllister, produced by Steve McAllister. I'm like, what the hell is this guy, Steve McAllister? And then I found out he worked at Baby Monster Studios in New York, and I called them, and they're like, oh, he's on the road with Swans. I'm like, okay. So he was everywhere. You know, he was on tour with COC. He was on tour with Swans. He was on tour with Belter Space, this band from New Zealand. They were amazing. I don't know if you ever heard Belter Space. They were a 3-piece band from New Zealand. Amazing. They were on Matador Records. Great band. I mean, they are, I think, the one of the forefathers of shoegaze. You
Really?
know, if you really talk about the beginnings of shoegaze, Belter Space is one of those bands. And Belter Space moved to New York from Auckland, and in fact, Neil, the singer and guitar player, he was even our roommate for a little while. Stevie's in mine. But yeah, so Stevie was on tour all the time. But Stevie started as the front of house guy at CBD,
Right.
right? He engineered the Agnostic Front live at CB's. He produced Force Fed for prom. Um, and he was the front of house and live touring sound guy for so CV was busy, busy, busy. And when we reached out to him, we thought, dude, this guy's gonna be a rock star. He's not gonna want to hear from us. So and this is Stalwart days. I'm talking about Stalwart. So we got a hold of him and talked to him on the phone. And the first thing he says is, we were like, look, we're here from Chicago. We moved here. We want to record with you. Uh, and this guy, Russell Burke, this Lower East Side 8-track dude who had done our demo, he had suggested Stevie to us. He's like, talk to Stevie. He'll hook you up. He's amazing. So we called him. We got his number from him. And Stevie was like, can I come to your rehearsal space and listen to you rehearse? We're like, we rehearse in our loft space in downtown in the financial district. They're like, where? And I told them Wall Street and Water. They're like, all right, when are you rehearsing next? We were like, we can rehearse whenever. We rehearse like 3-4 times a week, but we'll do a rehearsal on Saturday. He shows up with his briefcase, road case, hard road case, and he started taking notes and stuff. And then he's like, okay, so Swans are playing the World. Remember the club, the World on it was on Houston and Avenue C, I think. He's like, Swans are playing. You guys got to come and hang out. So uh, we didn't go because we were like, he's not going to put us on the list. But he had come and heard us play, so we thought he hated us, because we never heard back from him. He was so busy. So we didn't go. And the next day he calls like, dude, I put you on the list. Why don't you guys show up to the show? And we're like, you serious? You guys actually put us on the list? He's like, yeah, we were on the list. So it was like that. It was like we were very, we were like normal, down to earth people. We weren't really hanging out in this. We weren't scenesters and just like that, Crisis wasn't a scenester band either. We were nerds. Stevie was a nerd, and we loved that about Stevie. And Stevie had that. He had that thing that Steve Albini had,
Mm.
which is Stevie was into truth in production. He was that guy in New York City. Stevie was the guy. He believed in recording bands and capturing the essence of the live performance of a band. And I think on the West Coast, Billy Anderson was that. Billy is also a very good friend of mine. Billy produced our last record, but Billy is also that guy. He comes from the same punk rock ethic, and the ethic is that you all the Crisis albums, Joel, 85% of them were recorded live and then embellished with overdubs where we needed them, but they were done honestly, as live records. Always done with drums, bass, and guitar played live and a vocal scratch track. And of course, Karyn would redo her vocals. I would embellish my guitar parts. We'd maybe bring in Norman for a song or two, or we embellish things to create more atmospherics and stuff like that. But generally, they were honest recordings. And I think Stevie was that person. Stevie recorded a lot of great albums. He did Brutal Truth. He did COC's Blind. He was actually the main engineer for COC's Blind, which is a landmark record in my opinion.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, yeah.
he did a lot of he did like 3 Elliott Sharp records. Elliott Sharp's Carbon.
Mhm.
Mark Sloan, the bass player, actually, who was the bass player in Stalwart, I introduced Mark to Elliott, and he became and Joe Trump, the drummer. I introduced Joe Trump to Elliott as well. Uh, and Joe Trump was in Brian Brain with Martin Atkins.
Yep.
And I'm still in touch with Joe Trump, and I love Joe Trump. He's a phenomenal drummer too.
Oh yeah.
So that was those, and people don't know this, but Karyn performed with Elliot and Carbon a few times in the Lower East Side. She never ended up on a record, even though Elliot wanted to, but our schedules never met up. At that time, he was touring a lot, and we were touring a lot. And I think Birgit from Halcyon ended up doing some vocals on a Carbon record, who she was friends with us as well. But I know Elliot wanted Karyn because Elliot loved Karyn's voice. So Elliot really wanted Karyn to record as well, but it didn't happen. But yeah, so through Stevie, we met a lot of great talent in New York too. A lot of guys in Live Skull, like uh, James Lowe, who ended up in Chavez with Matt Sweeney later on, and Clay from Bullet Revolta. They were our next. They used to rehearse in the room next door to us
Oh
in the
wow.
Lower East Side. Yeah, for several years. Yeah, the rehearsal space was on Stanton and Attorney, which was a great rehearsal building. Heroin Sheiks rehearsed there with us, in the same building. Heroin Sheiks, you remember Heroin Sheiks? It was
Oh, of
Norman.
course. Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And Shannon
Yep.
and George, my buddy George, and God. But anyway, in terms of Stevie, Stevie was instrumental. I mean, we recorded I think the first known Apple recording on Vision, Studio Vision. Stalwart we did our entire album on Stevie's Mac Plus, I think it was. It was like sometimes we had to spend 15 minutes waiting for a sample to calculate, uh, in the right time and quantize. And I mean, we've spent 9 months in the basement. Stevie at that time didn't live with me, but he was in the basement on 14th Street, and Sean and Rob from White Zombie lived above it.
Hmm.
That was the building between Second and First Avenue on 14th Street. And Stevie had the garden apartment. The fucking rats were like this fucking big, dude, outside his apartment. It was scary. But yeah, Stevie's a brother. Stevie's in Tucson, Arizona, retired, but I'm still in touch with him too.
Cool.
He's a
Of
great guy.
course, Steve was in Damage, the great Damage with Patrick Blank and
Danny Morrison, Patrick Blank, that's right. Um, Mike Kirkland, two bass players, two guitar players. Killer, man. Mike Kirkland is also a phenomenal human being. Love that guy. I was in touch with him recently. I heard he's not well, but Denny's not well either, unfortunately. Denny Morrison, the guitar player in Damage. But Sue and Denny, so Denny's girlfriend Sue used to do a radio show on WBAI or whatever that in New York. I DJ'd on her show a couple of times, but I'm good friends with Denny too. Denny is a great guy, really good guy. But yeah, Stevie introduced me to the whole gang in New York, which was I can never thank him enough for everything that he did for us.
well, it's as we were saying earlier, how small the world really is.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I mean, back in the day, Tom Five. Talking about Tom Five. If you want to talk to him, I'll hook you guys up. I mean, or whatever. If
Oh
you
yeah. Oh, totally, totally. Yeah, he would
Tom Five is
definitely.
my brother, man. I love that. You Um, but yeah, I'm very much Tom comes and stays with me in Florida all the time. And I told you we're jamming together still too. So
Yeah, I definitely want to get to that. I wanted to kind of um move forward a little bit with Crisis now.
sure, sure.
The band did relocate to Los Angeles. I
Yes.
guess that would have been 99, 2000, thereabouts.
99. Yeah, it was about 9 months before 10 months, I think no, 9 months because we got there in January. So we toured across the US to get to LA, and that's how we paid for our, trip across. But yeah, it was like about 10 months before 9/11.
What led to that decision to go out there?
So it was basically like a no-brainer, Joel. I mean, if you remember with Giuliani and what New York was going through back then, I think that it became impossible for bands like us to live and survive in Manhattan. I think the bands that were able to do it were the bands that were living in Manhattan or Brooklyn and not touring, because we were touring so much that we couldn't afford our rents and stuff in New York while we were out in New York all the time. So it just, and also we were sort of preaching to the converted in New York City. Like our fan base was what it was. We wanted to sort of expand, and we wanted to, that was around the same time we were also beginning to go through our split with Metal Blade.
Hmm.
So um, we had a luckily for us, we had a lawyer, that was able to get us out of the contract, and we figured it would be good to go to LA and maybe find a new home, in terms of a label and in just new environment. And we thought it would give us a fresh impetus to write music too. And there were quite a few musicians that were moving to LA at that time. Uh, Underground musicians. We didn't, Roy had moved there a little bit before us. Tom had moved there. Tom Five also moved there around the same time. There was quite a few people we met from New York when we got there, which was good too. So yeah, it was more a financial thing too, because we felt like we were sort of beating our head against the sidewalk, in New York, and it was becoming more and more impossible to deal with the finances, because unlike a New York band, a typical New York band that has a family and grew up in Brooklyn or Queens or Manhattan, wherever, we were all transplants in New York, you know, all of us. So we didn't have the support mechanism or anything to fall back on. That's why bands in New Orleans, if for example, can keep their act together, they still live with their parents, or it's a lot of familiarity there. For us, we were all from other parts of the world or other parts of the country. So, and we came to New York to sort of do something
Right. Now, there was a point in time when Crisis changed its name
in LA.
in LA.
Yeah. Yeah. It was called Skullsick Nation. And again, what happened was our drummer, Tony Costanza, Tony was the drummer in Crisis when we moved to LA. And Tony was the original drummer in Machine Head, and he had moved to Harrisburg, PA, and he kept coming to New York, and he wanted to join Crisis. He tried out for us. He joined us, and we were in the middle of writing a record when we moved to LA. But we got to LA. He had already lived in LA, and he was very concerned about the drugs, and he was very concerned because Tony liked to party a lot. When he moved with his girlfriend moved with us, across the country, because we had for about a year we saved our finances from touring to rent apartments. We had three apartments in the same building on, Hollywood and Cherokee, just in downtown Hollywood. So Tony's girlfriend moved with him because that's the only way he moved. So we said, okay. I knew his girlfriend Abby very well because we all used to hang out at the same bar called Z Bar on Avenue A in Manhattan, right? So in the Lower East Side. So Abby was a good friend. We were like, all right, let's all move. So we all moved there. But once we got there, Tony could get into his depressions. He basically didn't want to be in LA once we got there. And he didn't like the vibe, and it was the same as it was when he used to be in LA many years ago. And he was like, "Dude, I'm sorry, I can't deal with it." So he moved to New Orleans and joined Crowbar.
Hmm.
That's when he joined Crowbar. So we were without a drummer, and we had a digital recording machine that Joanza, Gia, and I had purchased, and Karen, and so we started writing more sort of post punk inspired songs didn't sound like Crisis. It was more industrial sounding. It was more like Killing Joke meets Ministry. That kind of it had that kind of vibe, and we didn't want to put anything out as Crisis, because that music just did wasn't it wasn't what Crisis really stood for. It was more a studio project. That's when we changed our name. We had no drummer. So that's it was short lived. It was a way of us continuing making music. So when we got to basically when we got to LA, things sort of somewhat disintegrated for a little while as a result of Tony leaving and us not having a drummer and us being in LA, and every LA drummer that we tried out was like they had an agenda and they wanted to be in the next big band and you know wear the hits and that kind of shit. So so that's what that was about. We
Now,
never released anything. So
yeah, that was my question. There wasn't anything put out under
we
that name?
have we have about 25 songs recorded. So we did do a demo that Roy played on. Roy played on 6 songs that we've never released. But so yeah, we jammed with Roy, but Roy was so busy. He was in Soulfly. So it's like he was like not only in Soulfly, he was recording with Dave Navarro. He was recording. He was on tour with Amen as a sound guy. Like Roy was like nonstop. Um, couldn't keep him in one place. But Roy was always there. Whenever we need Karyn and I asked him, he was always there. And he's a phenomenal person, phenomenal drummer. He's just he deserves every good thing that happens to him. He deserves it. And his wife, Kazi, I love that girl. I remember the first date that they went on in LA when we met Kazi. So that was like 22 years ago now.
I haven't met him yet, but we always seem to be crossing paths in some way. Like he played there was a time when I was playing in a band called Electric Frankenstein out in
Yeah,
Jersey.
yeah, of course. I know
And
Electric Frankenstein very well.
yeah, a good friend of ours was starting his recording studio at the time. At that time, it was in his apartment. He's got a facility now, and an electric drum kit. And like to kind of like the guys in Electric Frankenstein wanted to record, like kind of on the cheap for a bit, I guess. And this guy was kind of learning his craft. So the Sal and Dan from Electric Frankenstein would invite,
Sal?
yeah,
Which Sal? Sal is okay. No, no, different Sal. I know who you're talking
yeah, Sal Kenson, he was in the Thing in the
about.
80s.
Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah. He'd invite different people to kind of jam, and then they would come out under different names, right? And I was there one day jamming. That became an Electric Frankenstein record. I think like the next night or later that week, Roy came down with Howie Pyro from Degeneration,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
and they recorded some stuff with those guys that came out as Maggot SS.
Okay.
So like, and there have been a couple of other occasions where Roy and I have kind of been like 2, 3 days apart from actually crossing paths. So one of these days we'll have to remedy that and actually get together.
Yeah, yeah. I think you guys would get along famously, man.
Yeah.
Roy is a sweetheart of a guy. I mean, but I'm so glad that he's finally gotten some, serious recognition and accolades. He deserves them, because he was in a lot of bands and he went into the band and he was sometimes you promise certain things and then in the end you end up being treated as like a gun for hire or whatever, and I think that Roy is never a gun for hire because he gives it his 200% in terms of his contributions musically, because the dude's he's a producer, drummer, songwriter, and he's phenomenal with synths as well. He has a whole mood room in his studio in Pasadena. I mean, he's got like a wall of mood. You
He
know.
was in that band Thorn, right?
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
yeah,
saw them live.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was Roy and John Jesse and
Right.
Stefan from Winter. He was the guitar player. It was a three piece.
Yeah. I
They were
remember,
phenomenal live, dude. They were a great live band.
yeah.
You know, and they should have been huge. And I think that, like, unfortunately, like that was one of the Roadrunner records that never came out. Like they recorded the record and then, it got, I don't know what happened. But yeah, yeah, Thorn was a really, really killer band. I mean, they're like great mix of like Amoebics meets Neurosis meets like Godflesh. I mean, it was like some cool shit, but they had their own slant to it. I mean, at that time, there was, you know, it was like soundtracky at times too. Very, very cool stuff. Love that band.
Yeah, I remember them. I only got to see them once, but I remember how great they were. They were
Oh, they
just,
were great. Very bass driven, and it was good. Yeah,
I
yeah,
miss that whole era. Like a lot of people talk about, the New York hardcore scene of the 80s, and that's fantastic. But for me, my entry point was the 90s. And
yeah.
there was a lot of great stuff happening in New
Oh
York.
yeah,
And it was all kind of it was very different, but everybody kind of felt part of a single scene. You know,
yeah,
you had Jesse and Howie at Coney Island High, kind of that
yeah,
glam New York doll scene, but
yeah,
everybody was tight with Murphy's Law. Everybody
yeah,
was tight with Warzone. Like it was a community. It
yeah.
wasn't necessarily genre driven. It was just people out
No,
there,
no,
you know.
that's true. I mean, it was basically, it was like a loose underground based on punk rock and hardcore and like garage rock, you
Yeah.
know, noise rock. I mean, whatever you want to call it. But I mean, there was. You remember the Spitters? They were great band. Spitters was a Lower East Side band, which was Mark uh, from Missing Foundation, the singer, and um, what was uh, my brain's not working. Bill Bronson, the bass player who also played in Swans
Right.
for a while. He was the bass player for Spitters. Spitters was very, very early Stooges uh, inspired punk band. Great band, man. If you can find any videos of the Spitters on YouTube, you should check them out. They were a very confrontational band,
Mm.
and real fucking grit and sweat and blood. I mean, they were great. They also, Roy produced their album. I forgot the name of it. I have the CD somewhere.
I'll have to
Yeah,
track that down. Yeah.
yeah. The Spitter. They were called the Spitters. Yeah,
Spitters.
yeah. Mark unfortunately passed away. The singer. He was a great guy. But yeah, there were a lot of other bands too, man. I mean, uh, my 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 mind is not working that great right now in terms of remembering things, but there were a lot of great bands. I mean, Alice Donut was another band, that
Yeah, yeah.
didn't get enough recognition. They were phenomenal live. I mean, they were. It's like Naked Raygun. Naked Raygun should be in fucking Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, in my opinion. That's how fucking good they are.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, and they're still like unknown band. In Boston, Sam Black Church, they're like kings of Boston. My buddy Ben Crandall was in Tampa 2 weeks ago and came and hung out with me in my house. The guitar player, Jet, the singer, and Ben were brothers, the guitar player and singer in Sam Black Church. And that's another band that, didn't get their due, really. Uh,
Yeah,
but
I saw their reunion show up here in 2016. They played Boston. They were fantastic.
Are
And
you in Boston?
I'm in New Hampshire, so
Oh, okay, okay, cool, cool.
not it's about an hour and 15-ish to get down there. I just saw Tree last weekend. Remember Tree from
Yeah.
Boston?
Hell yeah, man. I just talked to so before my bar closed down, I was trying to get Tree to come down here and play at my bar. Yeah. Because Dave, I mean we played shows with Tree back in the day, and Dave's hoot. He's a great guy.
Oh, great dude. Great dude.
Yeah.
An absolute man of integrity, Dave Tree.
Yeah, yeah. Dave's a great guy, and like I was friends with Jonah and Only Living Witness and Sound Black Church, and I mean all those. Even I mean, Only Living Witness, another great fucking band. You know, I mean, one of the great voices of the hardcore scene was Jonah. Jonah's voice was like unbelievable.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I think another great voice, of course, also from Connecticut, but now is Carl Legel. Do you know Carl?
Funny enough, I'm interviewing John Bomber from Seizure,
Oh, okay.
from the old Anthrax, and Carl was the singer for
Carl
Seizure.
was the singer of Seizure and School of Violence. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Stevie produced both School of Violence and Seizure. I think he produced Seizure as well, but he definitely produced the album School of Violence album.
Again, a minuscule world, man. It just gets
Yeah,
smaller
yeah,
and
yeah.
smaller and smaller.
And Carl is another guy that I think he really is underrated and never got the real credit that is due to him because his voice is phenomenal. I know he's in Legions of Doom with my buddy Ron from Trouble, and he's sort of like taken over after Eric Wagner passed away from Trouble. Skull. So they were called the Skull, but when Carl joined, they changed the name to the Legions of Doom. They're actually putting out a new record. Ron just told me that they just completed the record in Chicago.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean
Ron,
that Blind record, man. I mean,
oh
talk
my
about
God,
that changed the game at that point. When
game changer. That
that
was one.
beg to differ. That and beg to differ. When
Yeah, back
those
to different.
came out, game
Yeah.
on.
Oh yeah, they were like albums that set the tone for heavy music. And like Helmet did too. Meantime also did that. I mean, Meantime had a major impact as well. But yeah, I mean, I think Blind was a precursor to what came, and it's sort of it's like hardcore and punk inspired, you know, rock. And I think Blind was just a real statement in good songwriting too, man. Those songs are just unbelievable.
Yeah,
Great songs. I mean, Reed Mullen, rest in peace. He was a phenomenal musician too. Yeah.
absolutely.
They
Absolutely.
stayed with Stevie and me when they recorded Blind in New York. They stayed at the same loft where Karen and I and Stevie lived. So
Yeah,
that's how small of a world it is. Yeah. And they recorded it at Baby Monster Studios. That's where Swans recorded, that's where Prawn recorded, that's where Skin, Jura and Jarbo's Skin, World of Skin,
sure.
they recorded there. Yeah.
Very cool. Going back to Crisis, eventually the Crisis re-energized and became Crisis again. There was a fourth album, came out in I think 2004, was it? Like Sheep Led to Slaughter.
Yeah.
Great album, by the way.
Thank you.
And it had been a couple years since, obviously, it had been a couple years since I heard from Crisis, and I see the new album out, so I pick it up. If I'm not mistaken, it wasn't terribly far after that album's release that the band decided to call it a day. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think it was in 2000, late 2006 or 2007. Yeah, that we called it quits. Again, at the bane of our existence, we had troubles with the drummers. So the drummer that recorded like Sheep Like Slaughter, uh, unfortunately, in between the Kitty tour and no, the Soulfly tour and the Kitty tour, he had appendicitis and he had to get surgery and he came back to LA. And then Fred Waring, our original drummer, stepped in to do the Kitty tour. And then after that, we lost Fred because he couldn't take more time out. Then we did the Exodus tour, and then Justin Armand, who was the drummer in Society One. He ended up playing drums on the last tour. So again, it was like full circle again, trying to maintain a drummer to stick it out and I mean, to be honest, like our stuff is not easy to play. None of it is easy to play, and you know, we were pretty tired of teaching drummer after drummer, the ropes, and it's just very taxing because we did a lot of tours. We did like 5 tours for like Sheep Led to Smoke. We did an MOD Crisis tour. We did a Kitty OTEP Crisis tour. We did an Exodus tour. We did a Soulfly tour, and then we did warm-up shows with All Out War and Sub Zero, and like we did a lot of touring for that record, and we were pretty burned out. I thought we had one more record in us before we decided to call it quits. But yeah, it was rough because we were again gonna have to find, like, when we got off the road after 5 tours, we were gonna have to start from scratch looking for a drummer. So
Now, to the very best of my knowledge, there has not been a Crisis reunion. Is that right?
yeah, there hasn't been. I think that Masses Ashes are the new band that Fred and I sort of started. It's like just the reunion of Fred and me getting back together and writing some stuff. And the stuff that we're doing is not really, it's more post rock and more atmospheric and just, it's not Crisis, so.
Yeah, but since you went there, let's dive a bit further. So the current project is called Masters Ashes.
Yeah.
It's yourself and Fred. Eric Forrest from the Voivod era you toured with, he's going to be involved or already is involved. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
he's working on vocals. Yeah.
Excellent. And Tom Five, formerly of White
Now
Zombie,
five,
still
second
around?
guitar. Yeah, second guitar. Yeah. Tom and
Excellent.
I both playing guitar.
And you've got a couple of other very interesting people, Jeff Golden.
Yeah, Jeff Golden, who played with Crowbar for like 6 years, and then he played with 6 Feet Under on uh, he was a touring bassist for 6 Feet Under, and he played with some touring with Goat Whore as well.
Excellent.
So Jeff is my buddy. He's in Tampa. Jeff and Katie. Katie is his fiance, and she's a keyboard player for. She was in the Convalescence, and now she's. Jeff and Katie have a project too, which is really interesting, called Blood of the Earth. And I played guitar on one of their songs. It's an instrumental project, but it's sludgy. It's like Godflesh with keyboards and guitars and bass and uh, programmed drums. So it's like it got an industrial edge, but it's deep. It's good stuff. So the two of them are doing that. But they are also playing in Masters Ashes. And in fact, we played a few shows as an instrumental project, opening for Norman a couple of times. Norman's solo stuff, he played at my bar, Born Free, a couple of times, and we opened up for him. And then we opened up for a few other bands like Caveman Cult from Miami. We opened up for them. So we did a few choice shows, but it was always like it has a more of a post rock feel, so it goes okay as an instrumental project as well. But I think that just like just like Eric on Phobos, it was like a much more atmospheric record as well. uh Voivod's Phobos, and I think that that's that's where I thought of Eric, and I reached out to him and I'm like, dude, I love your voice, and would you be into it? So I sent him some of the stuff, and he was like, he really dug it, and he started working on it. So even though he's in Toulouse, France, but our plan is to have him fly over to Tampa, and we have a studio, my buddy Ryan Bosch's studio, who used to be Terry Date's assistant in LA. He's opened a studio here, phenomenal producer and engineer. So We've already done some recordings with him, so we're gonna continue with him. Yeah,
Excellent. And you were kind enough to send me
yeah.
some of the material, and I'm so psyched because I have the instrumental versions of the stuff, and it's just fantastic, man. And I know Eric's going to be involved in it. What kind of a timeline do you have as far as getting this stuff released?
So so we have 8 songs, and there some of them are lengthy and some of them are not. But I think we have a full length already composed and written that Eric has to chew through. So at the moment, what I sent you is like a 3 song EP. It's actually like almost like one piece, but it's like 3 pieces put together with segues and at sort of more like it has a more of a soundtrack, industrial soundtrack type of feel.
Hmm.
Uh, so he's working on those pieces, and he's written lyrics for all 3 pieces that form an EP. So once we can record those, well, he's recording them in France and sending them to me, and then I'm gonna let our producer listen to it, and then Eric will start working on the next 3, which we have recorded as well. But eventually it'll be 8 songs. It'll be so. What we want to do is it's almost like a, I don't want to say like a 70s prog thing, but it's it's going to be more of a concept record. So it's more like a trip. The whole, I want the record to sort of play like a trip, and I think that it's like a long soundtrack for the energies that I'm feeling that exist today. I mean, Master's Ashes is like an anarchist concept, so it's sort of like the destruction of the power structure, and sort of dealing with things in a more elemental way and breaking the society down to where it should be, as opposed to where it's at.
Hmm.
So that's what Master's Ashes sort of is. It is an apocalyptic end time sort of a concept, but I think it's a little richer in the sense that it's just not just about post death, but it's also talking about the psychology of criminality and psychosis, and both of them go together. And a lot of people in the power, in the power structure, I think a lot of them are psychotic, and there's a lot of psychopathology in the ruling classes, especially in amongst politicians and the people who hold power. So that's pretty much what it is. It's more of a crusty. It's a step back, and I think the attitude is more of that of sort of no gods, no masters, approach.
Excellent, excellent. I'm really,
Yeah, inspired by Amoebics for sure.
oh
I
yeah.
think, yeah. So
And look, how can you go wrong with anything inspired by Amoebics, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know how, I'm so in the wood in the weeds with the music that we've written, but I don't really know how it comes off. But I think bottom line is it goes from being riffy to being drummy. So it's everything between heavy riffs and drones. So that's pretty much what it is. Uh, I don't want to really make it too articulated and too defined. I think if anything, Eric's going to give it some definition.
Oh yeah,
So
for sure, for sure.
I'm looking forward to what I like about Eric's voice is that it has a texture to it, but it also carries tone. And it's sort of like I was telling Eric, I'm like, yeah, man, first time I heard you, being the industrial head that I am, I was like, the, I had inklings of ogre from Skinny Puppy. Like there's some elements of Eric's voice that sometimes sounds like ogre, which is a good thing. It does never a bad thing. So I
Yeah.
thought,
I'm a big fan of his, like in
oh,
terms
me
of
too, me too.
Voivod, as much as obviously who doesn't love Snake, but that whole era with Eric fronting Voivod, some of that stuff was like they even went past who they were. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
no,
I agree with you. I completely agree with you. And I think that some of it was so dark. I mean, it was like some of the darkest stuff that they've ever written. I mean, and Piggy's guitar work with Michelle's like almost jazzy drum approach is like it's otherworldly, man. You know, I mean, Voivod is always otherworldly, but I think that Phobos is a very dense and nocturnal nighttime type of project. You know? Which is really cool to hear. And that record was actually written after. So we did a very long tour for Negatron with like when they had come out with Negatron and we had come out with That Type of Extermination. That's when we met and we did those two tours. And then Piggy called me and he's like, "Hey, you hear the new Phobos?" He's like, "Ah, some of you hear some of those Crisis." So because Piggy really listened to a lot of what we were doing too, so he was like, he loved some of the back and forth that we did, you know, and he was very happy to tell me that he, you know, felt like he was inspired by what we were doing too, which I thought was, I'm only telling you this. I've never said that to anybody before, but Piggy was very complimentary to us about the positive impact we had on them touring, you know. And in fact, Michelle had Karyn write lyrics for that song Forlorn on Phobos as well with Eric. So that was cool too.
yeah, well, it's cool that all the years have gone by. You're still working with Fred. You're in touch with Eric. He's part of this project. Tom, from the old New York days.
Oh yeah.
It's cool to see that, and I'm of the age now where I'm going to be 47 in a few days. And people I played with 30 years ago, I'm still kind of say, hey, do you want to do something? Do you got any ideas?
I mean, it's like you. I know you went and jammed with Big Face and stuff. That it's like, but you know, it's like a tribal thing. Like-minded people, when they get together and jam, it's like nothing but smiles and happiness, man. That's really where it's at. It's not about the commerce part of it. It's about really putting your heads and your minds and your hearts together and
Yeah.
writing something special that because I think that's like the ultimate happiness, man. I mean, look at how fucked up our world is. I mean, you really think you were getting happiness out of that? I mean, I'd rather squeeze the happiness out of each other by getting together and doing this neo tribal thing. That's what I mean. Underground musicians, that's what we have. Is we have this
Yes.
intangible connections that we have. You know, I mean, Eric is sitting in Europe. But him and I were chatting on just like you and I are on Zoom. We were chatting on FaceTime, and we had nothing but smiles and talking about stuff. And he couldn't wait to work on it, and I couldn't wait to hear his. I can't wait to hear his voice on it. You know, so it's gonna be fun. And I told him, I said, dude, we'll fly you over here, record. You stay with me. We'll hang out. You know, break bread, and it'll be fun. You know, it's
Oh,
all to have fun. It's, you know, music's supposed to be fucking joy.
yeah,
You know, so
absolutely. Now, you had another band after Crisis, the Angels Whispered Danger, right?
who told you about that one?
I, I do my work. I do my
Yeah, no, yeah, we did. That was an amazing project too. Yeah, short-lived, but yeah. No. Yeah, that was really cool. That was also post-rock type of instrumental thing. What was cool is my dear buddy Dan Kaufman, who used to be in Dystopia and Mind Rot.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, he was the guitar player in Mind Rot. He's also lefty. He's a lefty guitar player. So I always wanted to start a band with him called the Left Hand Path, and everybody be left-handed in the band. It was like almost like a mirror effect. Everybody is playing the wrong way, and people are like, "What the hell is that?" It's like the Left Hand Path, man. It's evil, you know. But yeah, that would never happen. But we always talk about that. So when Crisis broke up, Dan's band Destroy Judas, he's got a phenomenal band called Destroy Judas that you should check out. They're heavy. Steve Berta from Phobia plays guitar in that band. Nikki. So after Mind Rot, they had another band called Eyes of Fire. They were on Century Media for a little while. So we had three guitar players in The Angel was Danger. It was Joanza, myself, and Dan Kaufman. And we wrote a bunch of pieces, but we only ever put out two pieces. Each of them were, I think, 7 or 8 minutes each.
Hmm.
Just like movements, you know, but more inspired by like Godspeed You Black Emperor and stuff like that. It's like just more melancholic, meandering, but then it did get heavy, you know. Neros is heavy. So
Cool.
yeah, so that stuff is on YouTube if you've checked it out. I don't know if you listened to it, but yeah, there's 2 tracks I think that Dan put up a while ago. It would
Cool.
be cool to put them out on vinyl. I think it would come off. It would sound pretty good, but we just haven't gotten around to doing it. I told Dan, I'm like, it's in your hands. Dude. You want to put it out? Put it out. Because Dan's an old crust punk, you know. Okay, he used to sing for Dystopia back in the day.
Hmm.
So Dan is a card holding crusty. So yeah, that was Nikki. Nikki, the drummer for Destroy Judas. That's what I was trying to say. The drummer for Destroy Judas, and then three guitar players, and then my buddy Sean from Apocalypse, the band Apocalypse from LA. He played bass.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I haven't had an opportunity yet, but I certainly will.
Yeah, I think you like it. It's very musical, man.
Cool.
Very musical. It's really, really cool. One song is called Dead Souls, I think, and the other song is called Khatam. Khatam means the end in Farsi.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Cool, cool. You know,
yeah.
when we before we started recording, we were saying, oh, would an hour be good? We've got a bit longer than an hour at this point. If you have a few more minutes, I did want to ask you, because you made some reference about playing at your club. And you did have a club down in Tampa, Born Free. Was it Born Free Pub and Grill? Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, it was Born Free Public.
And I know if I understand correctly, you had it for about a year and a half, 2 years,
3.5.
3.5 years. Okay. And then
Uh,
you things, I'll ask you to explain because I know
yeah, so what happened was my wife and I bought the business right in the middle of COVID, actually beginning of COVID. Um, we had, you know, I was going through some changes with my business that I moved here from California when I moved from California to Tampa, and COVID had sort of affected it negatively. And I told her, I'm like, look, things are not happening. Um, she had a catering company because she's a chef. She's very talented when it comes to food service. And so I told her, I said, look, let's look for a business that we can invest in and maybe turn it into a restaurant bar. So we started looking at businesses. We started going around to some of the businesses that were for sale. And there was one particular place that we went to a few times, and it was within our budget. And we decided to make an offer on the business. And it was an existing beer and wine bar that had been in Tampa for 60 years. Long-standing Tampa pulled-out bar. And I, of course, had visions of turning it into a, little hole-in-the-wall underground venue. And we were putting in a kitchen, and we invested quite a lot of money in getting permits and trying to put in a full commercial kitchen. But because of COVID, City of Tampa wouldn't give us the permits. They gave us the runaround for like 2 years. In any case, what happened was I turned it into a venue. I put in a PA, I built a stage, I You know, I basically bought a sound system, and my buddy Rick, who used to be in Torch, from Miami. I don't know if you remember the band Torch. They were on Relapse. He he was in a band called Caveman Cult, and he's in a band called Shitstorm, which is a sort of a they're a uh, crust grind band. They've been around for like 20 years. He wanted to play shows in Tampa, and my buddy who runs a record store called Steelworker Records. It's the only real metal record store, vinyl and cassettes and VHS and all that stuff. It's like an old school record store. Kenny, the owner, he said, "Look, man, if you want to do shows at your bar, I'm gonna help you." And then Rick in my sitting in Miami, he's like, "Dude, I'll bring bands from Miami. Let's do it." So we started doing shows. Before you know it, like I didn't realize there was such a need for a small venue in Tampa that we started booking shows. I mean, we had Sheer Terror, we had uh, Shattered Realm, we had Death Before Dishonor, we had a lot of East Coast punk, hardcore bands and punk bands. We had Crown of Thorns, Ezek's band. Ezek did his rap project there. Norman played a bunch of shows. Lydia Lunch played. We had a lot of really good shows at Born Free. Uh, but then our landlord passed. Our landlord passed away actually a year and a half ago, and he was a really nice guy. He was very fond of my wife and I. But I told my wife, I'm like, watch, there's gonna be changes, you know. And sure enough, it took about a year. But then his widow, and he had two daughters, and it was just a widow and two daughters, and they had a bunch of businesses, and they're from Montreal, and they decided they're divesting from all, so they wanted to put the place on sale. It's on a very major intersection in Tampa, so I think they just wanted to cash out, you know. So we lost our lease, basically, what happened, and then so since then we had a couple of the big venues in Tampa. Crowbar is a venue in Tampa, and the Orpheum. They both did benefits for Born Free. Very nice of them. And the underground scene in Tampa is like showed us a lot of love. We won a couple of awards as well for being, you know, like a watering hole for the disrespected, and especially for the underground. I think the punk scene and the hardcore and metal scene really took to Born Free in a very short amount of time. So now I'm looking to reopen. And if everything goes well, a buddy of mine from Chicago, he's showing a lot of interest in being my partner and investing with me. So if that works out, my buddy Glenn, who I've known, and he's known Laura Gomel. I've known him since I was 18 in Chicago as a college kid, you know. So and we're still friends, and he's moving. So I just helped him. He just bought a house 15 minutes from here. He's moving from Melbourne, from the east coast of Florida to Tampa. So if all goes well and it's in the cards, we'll do it again, you know.
Awesome. Well, I wish you luck with that. I hope it comes to it.
Thanks, man. It's tough, you know, it's very tough business. So if it's meant to be, it'll happen.
Yeah, right on. Well, I appreciate the fact that you built a home down there for as long as you did for live music and
Yeah, man.
get the
Yeah, in fact, I'm working. By the way, right now, I work at the Orpheum sometimes. I work at the Hard Rock Event Center. So I'm doing a lot of. I've become part of the IATSE theater and stagehand union too. So I'm trying to keep my work going with stage production and stuff. But in the interim, until you know, I can figure out my next plan for Born Free.
excellent, excellent. Well, I wish you well with that, and of course, I wish you well with the new project with Tom and Eric.
Eric.
You know, talk about a super group. I think I emailed that to you too. I'm like, there are super groups, then there's this.
Yeah,
Crazy.
well, we'll see. You know, I mean, I think it all comes down. Oh, by the way, I didn't tell. Do you know Pellet? Pellet. Sean Pelletier.
Uh,
Pellet
the
worked for
Pentagon
Relapse.
guy,
Huh?
guy who managed
Pentagram guy. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. I know
yeah,
of
yeah,
him.
yeah. So Sean, I call him Pellet. His nickname is Pellet. I've known Pellet for 30 years now. But Pellet is actually managing my stuff. So yeah, Pellet Pellet helped us get the Stalwart deal as well. So once we have our ducks in a row and we get our act together, I think that he's going to be able to help us get something going to get us out there. And if we do any live stuff, it'll be maybe some stoner fests or the festivals that they have. If there's demand for it, we'll do that. But that's it.
Yeah, that's cool. Again, another small world connection, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Pellet actually.
and I want to mention again, you brought it up a couple of times, but the very first Crisis album, which is called Eight Convulsions, was not too long ago reissued on a beautiful vinyl reissue of that album to mark the 30th anniversary. I'll definitely put some information in the video description. If people are new to Crisis, you know, that would be a good place to start. All four albums are great. But that, you know, since there's a new sort of package for that album, that'd be a great place to start. So I
Yeah, I
want
think.
to mention that's out there now. That
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah.
and you've had quite a journey, and you've taken quite a journey with me tonight, my friend. So I thank you so much for giving me so much of your time and sharing the
Hey
history.
man, thanks for giving me the time to talk to you because it's been long overdue because I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. Not about Crisis, but just rap with you. Because I'm very much into your you know your journalistic career, and I know you have excellent taste in music. I mean, Killing Joke as an example. I mean, but Killing Joke is one of my all-time influences and favorite bands. My whole back piece on my back is dedicated to Killing. So, Killing, yeah, and it doesn't end at Killing Joke. I know that there's a lot of common ground between you and me musically. So,
Man,
so
like I said, we've been chatting since 2006, maybe.
yeah, yeah.
You know, because I remember you had the back piece you have is lyrics for "You'll Never Get to Me," right?
Yes, you'll never get to me. Survival is my victory.
Right, right. Which, you know, is a beautiful song, and
Oh,
certainly. And I remember seeing that on this is how long ago it was, your MySpace avatar, and I'm like,
yeah, I was. Yeah,
and it was funny because that was around the time I was putting out that prong book, so I was talking to Mike Kirkland. I started meeting up with Norman Westberg in the city. It was like that. It
yeah.
was like
See,
that time where everybody was
all
kind of
all
reconnecting.
friends of mine, good friends of mine.
Yeah. So it was funny, that everybody kind of found each other at one time. In my case, it's like, oh, here's this guy, here's that guy, and you know, and the fact that we can have a conversation all these years later is very meaningful to me. So I really do appreciate it, Afzaal.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity, Joel. And let's stay in touch, man. And anytime you want to chat, dude, I'm here. Because I know, like I said, it's like for me, there's a musical tribe, and there's a thread running through all of us based on our passions, and our passion for music. So I have a lot of time for that passion, no matter what. You know.
Absolutely. I will take you up on that. Believe me.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you, man. I'll talk to you soon.
You got it. Thanks a lot.
All right. Okay. Bye.